I was just a few steps away from boarding when a flight attendant suddenly rushed toward me. Her name tag read Grace, but what I'll never forget were her eyes wide, terrified, desperate. She grabbed my wrist before I could take another step. "Pretend you're sick," she whispered, her voice trembling. "And leave this plane. Now." For a moment, I froze, thinking it was some kind of prank. The boarding gate hummed with routine noise-beeping scanners, rolling suitcases, cheerful announcements. Nothing about this scene should have felt wrong. And yet, Grace's hand shook so violently that her nails pressed into my skin. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Before it's too late." Something in her tone, raw, pleading, sent a chill crawling down my spine. I didn't understand it then. But 20 minutes later, I would realize that her warning hadn't just saved me from a flight, it had saved my life. Grace's words echoed in my head long after she disappeared back into the line of passengers. "Pretend you're sick." I stood there, frozen in the middle of the jet bridge, my boarding pass still clutched between my fingers. The air smelled like recycled coffee and metal. The people around me, families, business travelers, honeymooners, moved forward without hesitation, their faces calm, oblivious. Nothing about this moment should have felt wrong, but it did. Every instinct I had, honed from decades of observing students, colleagues, and strangers alike, screamed that something was terribly off. I stepped aside, letting people pass. Maybe she had mistaken me for someone else. Maybe there was a medical emergency she couldn't discuss openly. Maybe I was overthinking as usual. I almost convinced myself to shrug it off when I caught sight of her again through the cabin doorway. Grace was standing at the front of the plane, pale as paper, pretending to check an overhead bin. Her eyes met mine for a split second, and in that moment, I saw sheer panic. That wasn't confusion. That was fear. "Sir, are you boarding?" the gate agent called from behind. I nodded automatically, forcing a smile. "Yes, of course." I walked forward, every step heavier than the last. Inside, the cabin lights glowed in that artificial amber that makes everyone look slightly unreal. I found my seat in row 16, by the window. My son, Lucas, and his wife, Evelyn, were already seated 2 rows ahead. Evelyn looked over her shoulder and gave me a tight smile. Lucas didn't even turn around. "Ready for Seattle, Dad?" he'd said earlier that morning, voice cheerful but eyes distracted. "Big trip. Family time." It had sounded innocent enough. He'd even insisted on buying my ticket himself, something that felt oddly generous coming from him. Lucas was always busy, always distant since his mother passed 2 years ago. We'd barely spoken beyond surface-level pleasantries. And now, out of nowhere, a family trip. I wanted to believe it was his way of reconnecting. But Grace's warning replayed like a skipping record in my mind. "Leave this plane. Now." My pulse thudded in my ears. I tried to breathe normally, to convince myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe she'd overheard some private airline issue. Maybe it had nothing to do with me. Yet, when the pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm, steady, procedural, it did nothing to quiet the unease growing in my chest. Evelyn leaned toward Lucas. I couldn't hear what she said, but her lips moved fast, her expression sharp, controlled. Then they both looked straight ahead, perfectly synchronized. A strange chill ran down my spine. When Grace passed through the aisle during boarding checks, she didn't look at anyone until she reached me. Then she hesitated, just for half a heartbeat. Her fingers brushed my shoulder lightly, and she whispered without moving her lips, "Please." That single word made my throat tighten. I didn't know what to do. If I suddenly stood up and demanded to leave, everyone would stare. They might assume I was paranoid or worse, unstable. And yet, something inside me said to trust her. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. Maybe I really could pretend to be sick. The plane doors were still open, the last passengers were taking their seats. If I was going to act, it had to be now. My fingers dug into my armrest. I stood, stumbled slightly, and gasped. "My chest," I said loud enough for the attendants to hear. "Something's not right." Grace was there instantly, dropping her clipboard. "Sir. Are you okay?" Her professionalism was flawless, but her eyes flicked toward the cockpit for half a second, then back to me. "You need to come with me," she said urgently. Evelyn turned around, her smile fading. Lucas's brow furrowed but not in concern. More like frustration. As Grace helped me down the aisle, I caught their expressions clearly, not panic, not worry, disappointment. That look told me everything I needed to know. Within minutes, they had me in a wheelchair, rolling me back through the jet bridge while other passengers craned their necks to watch. My heart wasn't failing, but my world was beginning to crack open. When the doors closed behind me, Grace leaned down and whispered, her voice shaking, "Thank God you listened." I wanted to ask why, to demand answers, but before I could, the engines of the plane roared to life behind the glass wall. And as I watched it taxi toward the runway, something inside me whispered back the question I hadn't dared to say aloud. What was I just saved from? Grace pushed my wheelchair into the medical bay beside the gate, her breathing fast, her knuckles white on the handles. She looked nothing like the composed professional who just saved me from whatever had almost happened. Her blue uniform was perfectly pressed, but her face pale, tense, eyes darting toward every sound told a different story. "Just wait here," she whispered, glancing around the small room. "The paramedic will check your vitals in a minute. But listen, you're safe now. Do not get back on that plane. Do you understand me?" Her voice trembled so slightly that it made my stomach twist. I nodded slowly, still too stunned to respond. The walls of the room seemed to close in the sterile white tiles, the faint hum of fluorescent lights, the scent of antiseptic and metal. Safe. From what? Through the narrow window, I could still see the gate. Lucas and Evelyn hadn't followed me. They hadn't even looked my way as I was wheeled off. And that small detail more than anything made my pulse quicken. I should have felt embarrassed, an old man making a scene, pretending to be ill in front of a planeload of strangers. But instead, I felt watched. Not by the crowd outside, but by the absence of concern from the two people who should have cared most. The paramedic surveyed a young man with a calm face and practiced routine. "Sir, do you feel any pain?" "No," I said truthfully. "Just confusion." He smiled politely. "Happens a lot. Air travel's stressful." Stressful. If only he knew. He clipped a monitor to my finger, checked my pulse, my blood pressure. "Vitals are perfect," he said. "You're fit to fly." Might have been a bit of anxiety. Or instinct, Grace muttered under her breath. The paramedic gave her a curious glance but didn't press. When he left, she turned to me, eyes wide. "I can't explain everything yet. Not here. But you need to trust me, Mr. Marshall," I said quietly. "Ethan Marshall." She nodded. "Mr. Marshall, please don't contact anyone until I reach you again. Just go home for now." "Wait." I studied her face. She looked young, mid-20s maybe, but there was something in her expression, something haunted, that made her words impossible to ignore. "What's going on?" I asked. "Was there a threat on the plane?" Her lips parted, then closed again. She hesitated. "Not a general threat," she said finally. "A personal one." Before I could ask more, her radio crackled with a supervisor's voice. "Grace, we need you back on flight 287 now." She froze, eyes flicking between me and the door. Then she leaned down, her whisper barely audible. "Whatever you do, don't drink or eat anything you didn't open yourself. Please. Just wait for me to contact you. And then she was gone. I sat alone in the medical bay, the monitor still clipped to my finger, beeping faintly in rhythm with my pulse. Outside the glass wall, I watched as Flight 287 pushed back from the gate. My plane. My family. They hadn't even texted to check on me. As the aircraft began taxiing, a strange heaviness settled in my chest, not pain, but dread. Through the large windows, I saw Lucas turn slightly in his seat near the window. Even from this distance, even through the glare of the glass, I recognized his profile. But what I saw next chilled me to the bone. Evelyn leaned toward him, speaking rapidly. Lucas nodded, then pressed his fingers to his temples, eyes shut, frustrated. She reached out, touched his arm. He shook his head once, then turned away. There was no fear. No worry. Only irritation. The engines flared, and the plane began to move down the runway. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt like I'd just stepped out of my own funeral procession. When the plane finally lifted into the gray afternoon sky, its tail disappearing into the clouds, I felt a hollowness open in my chest that words couldn't fill. Grace's last warning echoed in my head: don't eat or drink anything you didn't open yourself. My mind spun through fragments of memory. Evelyn in my kitchen last week, stirring my tea for me. Lucas insisting on managing my medications. The sudden push for this family trip. The insurance talk over dinner 2 nights ago that had felt strangely rehearsed. Something inside me broke. I reached for my phone. 2 unread messages from Lucas blinked on the screen. Dad, hope you're okay. We'll call when we land. I stared at the words until they blurred. Hope you're okay. No apology. No concern. No real emotion. Just a performance like everything else lately. I turned off my phone, pocketed it, and stood slowly. My legs trembled, not from weakness, but from the realization that Grace hadn't just pulled me off a flight. She'd pulled me out of a trap. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. 2 hours had passed since the plane vanished into the clouds, but I was still sitting in the same hard plastic chair in the medical bay, staring at nothing. My body was calm, but my mind wouldn't stop replaying every second before takeoff. Grace's trembling hands, her desperate whisper, the look in my son's eyes when he realized I wasn't on board. I finally forced myself to stand. The terminal around me buzzed with ordinary life: boarding calls, laughter, the rolling of suitcases, but I felt detached, like I'd stepped out of the world everyone else was still living in. I didn't know what to do next. Call Lucas? Confront him? Pretend nothing had happened? Before I could decide, someone tapped my shoulder. I turned. It was Grace. Still in uniform, still pale, but now with a quiet determination replacing her panic. Come with me, she said softly. We can't talk here. She led me down a side corridor, past security offices and cleaning closets, until we reached a small break room at the end of the hall. The blinds were half closed, light falling in narrow stripes across a table covered with coffee stains and half-empty water bottles. Grace shut the door, checked the hallway through the blinds, then exhaled shakily. I shouldn't be doing this, she whispered. But I couldn't just pretend I didn't hear it. My chest tightened. Hear what? She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. This. Her fingers trembled slightly as she scrolled to a video file. I recorded this in the crew restroom before boarding. I wasn't trying to spy, I just heard something strange and started recording, thinking it might be a security issue. She set the phone on the table and pressed play. The screen showed the ceiling of a restroom stall. The audio was muffled at first, just the echo of running water and the hollow hum of ventilation, but then a voice came through. A woman's voice. Precise. Controlled. I would have recognized that tone anywhere. Evelyn. The dosage has to be exact, she was saying. It'll dissolve fast. He won't taste it. At altitude, it'll look like a heart attack. No one questions an old man dying in his seat. There was a pause, then a man's voice. Lucas. My son. What if something goes wrong? Evelyn laughed, short and sharp. Then we'll say it was stress. His blood pressure's high. We already have the medical records. Lucas whispered something I couldn't make out. Evelyn's reply was chillingly calm. $500,000, Lucas. Once it's done, we're free. The audio stopped. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I stared at the phone like it might burn through the table. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, but my body felt detached, like I was watching a scene from someone else's life. When I finally found my voice, it came out barely above a whisper. You're sure it was them? Grace nodded. I saw them leave the restroom together right after. Same voices. Same words. I sat back slowly, gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. They were planning to kill me. It wasn't a question. It was a truth forming in real time. Grace swallowed hard. When I heard them talking about altitude and medication, I knew it wasn't just talk. I couldn't let it happen again. Again? I asked. Her expression flickered with pain. My father died 3 years ago. Everyone said it was an accident, fell down the stairs. Later, I learned my cousin had changed his will the week before. I never proved anything. She took a deep breath. When I heard your daughter-in-law say those words, I couldn't let history repeat itself. Something broke inside me then. Not in grief, not yet, but in trust. Every memory of Lucas as a child, every photograph, every proud father moment, they all shattered into fragments that didn't fit together anymore. I ran a hand over my face, my voice rough. I don't even know where to begin. Grace slid the phone toward me. Start with the truth. Take this recording. Make copies. And tell someone you trust. I looked at her. Why risk your job for me? Her eyes glistened, but her voice stayed firm. Because silence cost me my father. I won't make that mistake twice. For the first time in hours, I felt something other than fear. It wasn't hope exactly, more like purpose. The numbness faded, replaced by a quiet, simmering clarity. I took her phone, forwarded the recording to mine, and wrote down her number. Thank you, I said softly. You just gave me back my life and a reason to fight for it. Grace nodded, straightening her uniform. You don't have to thank me. Just promise me one thing, Mr. Marshall. What's that? She met my eyes. Don't underestimate them. As she left the room, the door closed with a hollow click that echoed like a verdict. I stood there, the recording still playing faintly in my head, Evelyn's cold, measured voice saying, he won't taste it. No one questions an old man dying in his seat. I wasn't dead. But they'd already buried me in their plans. Now, it was my turn to dig them out. The drive home from the airport felt longer than it ever had before. The city outside my window looked the same: strip malls, streetlights, traffic humming along, but it all seemed hollow now, like I was moving through a movie set built to mimic reality. Nothing around me felt real anymore. When I pulled into my driveway, the house stood, the Remy house of 30 years, still and silent. For decades it had been my refuge, a place filled with the laughter of my late wife and the smell of Sunday dinners. Now, it felt haunted, tainted by the thought that for the past few months, my son and his wife had walked these same halls, smiling at me while plotting my death. I left the suitcase in the car and went straight to my study. The room smelled faintly of cedar and dust, lined with books that had seen better days. A framed photo of Lucas at 10 sat on my desk, his smile wide, front teeth missing. He'd made that little frame in art class. I used to think that picture captured innocence. Now I wondered if that innocence had ever been realer if I'd simply refused to see who he'd become. Grace's voice echoed in my mind, "Start with the truth." So, I did. I opened the old oak filing cabinet by the windowy vault of everything that mattered: insurance policies, property deeds, bank records, even copies of old lectures from my teaching days. Years of order and meticulous documentation, the habits of a man who'd spent his life teaching students to value evidence over assumption. I spread the papers across the dining table, organizing them by instinct: chronology, topic, relevance. Then I started looking for inconsistencies. It didn't take long. Halfway through a stack of insurance documents, I found one that didn't belong: same letterhead, same formatting, but the signature at the bottom wasn't mine. The handwriting was close, almost perfect, but not quite. The capital E in Ethan curved too sharply, the M in Marshall had an extra flick at the end, something I'd never done. I compared it with an older form, overlaying the pages beneath the lamp. There it was, a forgery, confident but imperfect. Someone had changed the primary beneficiary. Originally, the policy was meant for a scholarship foundation my wife and I had created in her name. Now it listed Lucas Marshall as the sole recipient. Date of change: 4 months ago. I set the document aside carefully, my pulse steady but my hands trembling. Next came the bank records. Most looked routine: small withdrawals, pension deposits, auto-pay bills, until I noticed a pattern of recurring transfers, each under $10,000, each to an unfamiliar account number. Small enough to avoid raising red flags. $38,000. Gone. The signature on those transfers? Minute, at least according to the bank. Except it wasn't. The loops in the signature were tighter, neater, as if written by someone trying to be precise, not natural. I felt my throat tighten. My son had learned how I signed documents, he'd seen me do it hundreds of times. That made it easy for him to copy, just well enough to fool a banker who didn't look too closely. I sat back, staring at the table covered in papers that now felt radioactive. Every piece of my life, me money, my home, my legacy, had been infiltrated, rewritten, stolen in plain sight. The hardest part wasn't anger. It was understanding how deliberate it all was. This wasn't impulsive. It was a structure, a sequence of calculated steps, each building on the last. A new power of attorney form lay near the bottom of the pile, marked "updated." I didn't remember updating it. When I looked at the signature, the forgery was more confident this time: fewer mistakes, more control. The date matched the same week Lucas had convinced me to let him help organize my finances. That was the day I'd unknowingly handed him access to everything. My stomach turned. The more I uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Lucas and Evelyn hadn't just plotted to kill me on that plane. They'd been dismantling my life piece by piece for months, rewriting the narrative so that if I did or even appeared mentally unfit, everything would fall neatly into their hands. I felt the chill of betrayal seep deeper, colder than any winter draft. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in years: Thomas Keller, my former student, now an estate lawyer. A good one. Honest. Sharp. He'd once told me, "You taught me that history always leaves evidence. People just need to look." When he answered, his voice carried the same steady confidence I remembered. "Professor Marshall. I can't believe it's you." "Thomas," I said quietly, staring at the stack of forged papers on my table. "I think someone's trying to rewrite my history." There was a pause. "Tell me everything." So, I did. By the time I finished, the last traces of evening sunlight had faded from the window. Thomas listened without interrupting, his breathing calm and deliberate. When I was done, he said, "I'll come by tomorrow morning. Don't destroy or move anything. We'll handle this methodically." His tone reminded me of myself years ago, lecturing about documentation and patterns about how truth, no matter how buried, always finds a way to surface. After the call ended, I looked back at the photo of Lucas. That little boy smiling at me from the frame had grown into a man I didn't recognize. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't going to get away with rewriting my story. By the fourth day, the act had become second nature. I moved slower, spoke softer, forgot names on purpose. Every misplaced word or awkward silence reinforced the story. Evelyn wanted to believe that I was slipping, that their plan was working. But behind the mask of confusion, my mind had never been sharper. Each night, I reviewed the camera footage from the day before, headphones pressed tight to my ears, watching the performance unfold like a dark play in 12 silent frames. I didn't need to imagine their guilt. The recordings handed it to me scene by scene. That evening, I caught them in the kitchen after they thought I'd gone to bed. Evelyn's voice was low, irritated. "You said it would be simple, Lucas. He's still fine. Still suspicious. You said the pills were safe," Lucas shot back. "You said he'd look sick, not paranoid." "He will," she snapped. "If he keeps taking the dosage." That word dosage froze me. I paused the playback, replayed the segment twice to be sure I hadn't misheard. There it was again. Dosage. The same clinical tone, the same detachment I'd heard in Grace's recording from the airport. They weren't giving up. I leaned back in my chair, heart hammering, realizing this wasn't just about documents or forged signatures anymore. They still meant to finish what the flight had failed to accomplish. The next morning, I called Thomas. He arrived within the hour, his face pale as he listened to the audio I'd clipped from the footage. "You're recording all of this?" he asked quietly. "Everything," I said. "Video, audio, dates, timestamps. Every word." He nodded slowly. "Good. Keep doing that. I'll start preparing the protective order and notify my contacts at the district attorney's office. We can't go public yet, not until we have a complete pattern. Then we'll give them one," I said. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "You have something in mind?" I nodded. "They're trying to build a narrative that I'm incompetent. Let's help them build it until it collapses on them." The next few days unfolded like a chess match. I played the bumbling old man, losing my keys, confusing dates, asking Evelyn to remind me which pills were which. Each time she handed me my medication, I pretended to swallow, palming the pills under the table. Later, I sealed them in a plastic bag and labeled each one with the date and time. Thomas arranged for a toxicologist he trusted to analyze them. When the report came back, the results confirmed what we feared. The capsules contained a mild beta blocker in higher than prescribed dosage, enough to lower my heart rate dangerously if combined with my actual medication. I stared at the report in silence for a long time. Then I looked at Thomas. "They wanted to kill me slowly," I said. He didn't argue. He just nodded grimly. "We'll add it to the evidence list." That night, I sat in the living room pretending to doze in my chair while Evelyn paced nearby, whispering into her phone. The audio recorder hidden in the vent picked up everything. "The higher dose isn't working fast enough," she hissed. "He's still too alert. Maybe we need something stronger." A pause. Then a man's voice on the other end, unfamiliar, low. "Don't rush. If it looks unnatural, you'll lose control of the narrative." "We already lost control when that flight attendant interfered," Evelyn snapped. "I'm not waiting forever." The conversation ended abruptly. I sat in the dark, breathing quietly, every word sinking into me like cold steel. Evelyn had a supplier, someone providing whatever she was using to drug me. The next day, I handed Thomas the new recording. "Find out who she's talking to," I said. He did. Within 24 hours, his investigator traced the number to a man named Dr. Andrew Collins, a former medical consultant suspended years ago for unethical prescriptions. The dots were connecting faster now. We met again in Thomas's office late that afternoon. He leaned forward, voice steady but urgent. "Ethan, we have enough to open a criminal case: fraud, forgery, attempted poisoning. But if we wait just a little longer, they'll try to push for full guardianship. When they do, everything they've forged will become court evidence and we'll expose it all at once." I understood immediately. It was the same strategy I'd taught my students when analyzing history's greatest conflicts. Sometimes victory wasn't about striking first, it was about letting your opponent reveal their plan completely before you act. I looked at Thomas and said, "Then we wait. Let them think I'm losing my mind." He hesitated. "It's dangerous." "So is ignorance," I replied. "But I'm done being ignorant." That night, before bed, I wrote in my old teaching journal, the same one I'd kept for decades. Lesson for the day. Evil rarely hides in darkness. It hides in plain sight, confident that no one's watching. I looked up at the small red light above the fireplace, my silent witness. "Oh, but I'm watching," I whispered. "And I'm taking notes." The courthouse smelled faintly of varnish and old paper, the scent of history, of justice written one signature at a time. I'd been in hundreds of classrooms and auditoriums over the years, but none felt as heavy as this room. Thomas sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, adjusting his notes with a calm precision that mirrored my own. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. I nodded. I've been preparing for this lesson my entire life. Across the aisle, Lucas sat stiffly beside his attorney, avoiding my gaze. He looked smaller than I remembered, the boy who once built model airplanes on our dining table, now a man unraveling under the weight of his own choices. Evelyn wasn't there. She'd already pleaded guilty to multiple charges, trading testimony for a lighter sentence. Her betrayal was complete even to him. The judge entered, the courtroom rose, and the trial began. The prosecutor spoke first, his voice steady but charged with moral clarity. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that Lucas Marshall and his wife conspired to defraud and murder his father, Ethan Marshall, for financial gain. What began as financial exploitation escalated into a calculated plan to end his life." He laid out the timeline, methodical and damning: forged documents, falsified medical records, unauthorized transfers, and the recordings. Evelyn's voice cold and clinical as she described how altitude would make a heart attack look natural. The courtroom was silent as the video played. On the screen, the sound of her voice filled the air. "He won't taste anything." Christopher's nervous, but committed. "500,000 clean, easy." Lucas's hands clenched in his lap. He didn't look up. Thomas leaned toward me and whispered, "That recording just convicted them both." Next came the bank statements, page after page showing withdrawals, transfers, and forged authorizations. Then the toxicology report confirming the altered medication Evelyn had slipped into my daily regimen. By the time the prosecution rested, the truth had been carved into the record like a monument. Then came my turn. I stood, hand on the railing as I approached the witness stand. The bailiff swore me in, and I settled into the chair, back straight, hands steady. The prosecutor began gently. "Mr. Marshall, when did you first suspect something was wrong?" The moment kindness returned where there had been none, I said simply. "When people who had ignored me suddenly wanted to take care of me." A few jurors nodded faintly. "And what did you do when you realized your life was in danger?" I smiled faintly. "What I've done all my life." I observed. I took notes. I gathered evidence. And I waited for the right time to tell the truth. He let the silence hang for a moment before continuing. "Mr. Marshall, what would you like the court to understand about this case?" "That this isn't just about money," I said. "It's about how easily trust can be weaponized. I raised a son who forgot that integrity is worth more than any inheritance. When the defense attorney stood, his questions were sharper, desperate. Mr. Marshall, isn't it true you've been under stress since your wife passed away? That your memory has. My memory, I interrupted, is intact enough to remember every lie they told. The judge raised an eyebrow. The defense attorney reddened and sat down. After that, the rest was procedure. Evidence entered, witnesses called, closing arguments made. But I barely heard them. My mind was fixed on the boy across the aisle, the one I'd once carried on my shoulders through the streets of Boston, who'd grown into this hollow man I hardly recognized. When the jury returned, no one breathed. On count 1, conspiracy to commit murder guilty. On count 2, fraud guilty. On count 3, forgery and elder abuse guilty. The words landed with quiet finality. Lucas's head dropped into his hands. For the first time, he looked at me, truly looked, and I saw tears in his eyes. Not remorse, exactly. Something smaller. Something like realization. The judge delivered sentencing swiftly: 5 years in federal custody, restitution of $38,000, and permanent forfeiture of inheritance rights. Evelyn would serve longer for her direct involvement and medical violations. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement, I rose once more. Your Honor, I don't ask for vengeance, I said. Only understanding. I gave my son everything I had: education, home, love, trust. He returned none of it. But today, I'm reminded that justice isn't revenge. It's clarity. And clarity is freedom. The judge nodded solemnly. Well said, Mr. Marshall. Afterward, reporters waited outside, microphones flashing like tiny, hungry mouths. I gave a brief statement, nothing more than truth. Justice was served, I said. If this story teaches anything, it's that silence protects no one. When something feels wrong, speak. Document. Trust your instincts. Thomas drove me home in silence. When we reached the house, he put a hand on my shoulder. You did it, Ethan. It's over. Not over, I said softly, looking at the garden where I used to play catch with my son. Just finished. Inside, I went to my study. The evidence board that had once covered the wall was gone, every photo and document neatly filed away in a single box labeled Marshall Case Closed, 2025. I slid it onto the highest shelf and exhaled slowly. The room was quiet again. At my desk, I opened my old teaching journal one last time and wrote. Lesson 40,001, Truth, when documented, defends itself. Lesson 40,002, Sometimes, justice is simply surviving. I closed the book and looked out the window as the sunset spilled gold across the garden. Tomorrow, I would start again. Maybe teach a class. Maybe volunteer. But tonight, I allowed myself to breathe, not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as a man who had finally reclaimed his life. The storm had passed. And I was still here.